Also, the court used language that's consistent with the denial of a motion to intervene. In fact, it specifically says at page 17 that it's denying the state's request to intervene and that it's reaffirming its decision to deny the intervention of the state of Arizona, as opposed to whether reconsideration is timely under the circumstances. Now, as for the matters addressed, the court certainly had discretion to get to the merits of the motion and address all of the Rule 24A and Sierra factors, and that's what it did. The motion argued that the unitary status plan did exceed the scope of the court's remedial authority, and I refer you to ER docket 1418 at page 4, and perhaps most importantly, the court rejected it on the merits. The court said, and I quote, "The court does not exceed its authority by approving and adopting the USP that contains the curricular provisions." And as far as Arizona's raising that point below, I just want to point the court to the parts of the record where Arizona did indeed argue that the USP was exceeding the scope of its authority in the original motion to intervene. And I'm talking about volume 4, docket 1367 at page 2. The state specifically argued that the ethnic studies and culturally relevant curricula, and I'm quoting now, unconstitutionally usurp Arizona's right to administer its laws. If you look at the state's objections to the proposed unitary status plan, and now I'm referring to excerpts volume 3, docket 1409 at page 4, the state argued that in the long history of this case, again I'm quoting, "This court has made no findings that the curricula and courses offered by Tucson Unified School District violated any student's constitutional rights. The proposed remedy of creating specific courses for African American and Latino students is thus not a remedy that is required to vindicate any constitutional guarantees." And in case there's any doubt about whether this was litigated substantively below, I want to point you to one more document and note that the Mendoza plaintiffs responded robustly to this argument about the scope of the district court's authority. Excerpts of record volume 4, docket 1370, beginning at page 2, that response devotes 4 pages exclusively to the 10th Amendment argument. And finally, and most importantly, the district court addressed and rejected it in its final order, which is the order we're appealing from. The court said, and this is at page 16 of its order, which appears at volume 1 of the excerpts, quote, "The court does not exceed its authority by approving and adopting the unitary status plan containing curricular provisions." Now, if that is the issue before the court and the issue that the court ruled upon, I do not see how that issue can't be properly in front of this court. The final point is that the state's contention has been mischaracterized here today. It is not that any culturally relevant curricula would violate an Arizona statute. There are certainly types of culturally relevant courses that would conform to Arizona law. But if you design one specifically centered on the cultural experiences of African American and Latino students, then you are culturally isolating them, and you are teaching them only about one culture. And that's not merely a violation of Arizona law. That is directly contrary to what the Supreme Court was attempting to remedy in the Milliken II case. The Detroit school system had so pervasively and persistently segregated African American students in that district that they became culturally isolated. They were not part of the mainstream of students taught in that district in other schools, and it developed in them, and I'm taking all of this out of Milliken II, it developed in them attitudes, habits of speech, etc., that were outside of the environment in which they would need to compete in the post-secondary world. In this case, you have a unitary status plan that is attempting to achieve exactly the opposite. You have students who are presently in the mainstream, and you have a culturally relevant curriculum plan that specifically centers on one ethnic or racial group and teaches that group only about that culture. That is contrary not only to Arizona state law, but to United States Supreme Court precedent. Thank you.
Thank you.